Last of Us was one of the games that made me want to buy a PS4, and when I finally played the game, it was an emotional roller coaster. All of the twists and turns kept me surprised throughout the entire game. I wanted to see the characters survive the trials they faced during their journey, and the ending is something I will never forget. Whenever this game gets discussed online or offline, it's mainly about Joel and Ellie. I rarely hear about the gameplay when Last of Us is brought up in a conversation. It's always the memorable cutscenes between the two characters that are fondly remembered. So I decided to play Last of Us a second time, and it lost all of the impact it had from my first playthrough. In order to understand why this is the case, we need to look at the story. I don't think it's hard to argue that the main plot of the game is pretty generic. There's suddenly an outbreak that turns people into mindless zombies, and you have to deliver a girl who can't get infected to a terrorist organization called the Fireflies that can create a vaccine. What carries the bare-bones story is the bond that grows between Joel and Ellie. The developer Naughty Dog attempts to make you feel for Joel right away by starting off with a heartfelt moment with his daughter.
Where did you get the money for this?
Drugs. I sell hardcore drugs.
Oh, good. You started helping out with the mortgage then.
Yeah, you wish.
Fast forward a couple hours later, and people are starting to turn into zombies. Joel tries to escape with his daughter, but sadly, she doesn't make it. It's probably one of the most saddest scenes in gaming history, and sets the tone for the harsh realities the player has ahead of them. Last of Us is full of these shocking and intense moments that keep the player on the edge of their seat. It's similar scenes like this that develop the relationship between Joel and Ellie. Apparently, Ellie is immune to the virus that is causing people to turn, and due to a series of circumstances, Joel has to bring her to the Fireflies. He's not exactly a fan of her at first because his partner Tess died during the mission. In order to find the Fireflies, Joel needs to meet up with his younger brother Tommy, who is a former member. Along the way, Joel needs to protect Ellie from all sorts of danger, but refuses to let her help. That is, until a hunter tries to murder him and Ellie saves him. Despite this, he still remains adamant about her even holding a gun to at least help him out. But he has a change of heart and decides to give her a rifle to help him get past a blockade of enemies. After they clear them all out, Joel finally starts to see Ellie in a more positive light. He gives Ellie her own handgun, which symbolizes that he at least trusts her to have his back. Any reluctance Joel still has toward Ellie disappears after they find Tommy. Joel wants to hand the responsibility of Ellie over to his brother because he knows where to find the Fireflies. The logic makes sense, but Ellie catches on to Joel's plan and runs off. Joel and Tommy find Ellie in a bedroom of an abandoned house. It's here where Ellie lets out her feelings about Joel leaving her and how he is the only person left that she cares about.
Everyone I have cared for has either died or left me. Everyone fucking except for you. So don't tell me that I would be safer with someone else, because the truth is I would just be more scared.
Despite the intense exchange, Joel understands the torment Ellie has faced as well since he's experienced the same thing. He decides to finish the job that he started and takes her to the Firefly lab at the university in Colorado. However, things take a turn for the worse. The Fireflies have abandoned the lab and moved to a hospital in Utah. As they prepare to leave, a group chases them down. The duo tries to flee, but in the process, Joel falls from the second floor onto a metal rod. At this moment, you feel useless. You can barely move Joel, and you now have to rely on Ellie to get the pair to safety. Luckily, the both of them make it out alive, or so you think. Joel falls to the ground as the game cuts to black. All you see next is a snowy forest with an arrow piercing through a rabbit, as the camera pans to Ellie all by herself. On my first playthrough, I had to take a break for a couple days to process what the hell just happened. But the thing is, it still gets more emotional after. Ellie continues to hunt and finds a deer grazing through the forest. She tracks it down only to find two men wanting to take the deer. The two offer to exchange goods for the deer, and Ellie says she wants medicine. Big sigh of relief at this point knowing that Joel is alive, but it's only for a moment. It turns out Ellie is talking to the leader of the group who sent his men to the same university to scavenge for supplies. However, instead of killing her, he offers to protect her, and only her. She refuses and runs off quickly to give Joel the care that he needs. After tending to Joel, she hears people outside of their hiding spot and realizes that she was tracked. Ellie lures them away from Joel but is captured in the process. Upon waking up behind bars, she sees that the group has resorted to cannibalism. Despite this, the leader still tries to recruit Ellie, but she ain't having none of that. She has a brutal battle with the leader, but right after the final blow, the game cuts to Joel rushing to save Ellie. Ellie brutally murders the leader as Joel comforts her and says,
Fucking touch me!
It's okay. It's me. It's me. It's me. Look. It's me.
He tried to...
Oh, baby girl.
This one line here finally shows that Joel sees her as more of a daughter. The end of the adventure is just over the horizon. They make it to the new HQ of the Fireflies, but Joel finds out that in order to reverse engineer the virus to make a vaccine, Ellie has to die. He refuses to accept it and gets Ellie out of there before the procedure is able to begin. Joel lies to Ellie and says there are multiple people who are immune, and the Fireflies are no longer looking for a cure. The end of the game has Ellie asking one more time if Joel is telling the truth.
Swear to me. Swear to me that everything that you've said about the Fireflies is true.
I swear.
Okay.
A crucial aspect of this game that is able to strengthen these moments is the incredible acting. At certain points, it feels like you're watching a movie due to how some of the cutscenes are shot. There's a documentary on PlayStation's YouTube called Grounded, and it goes over how they selected the cast. The focus is mainly on Joel, but it shows just how much care went into making these moments as memorable as possible. On my first playthrough, all of these events hit incredibly hard. I constantly wanted to see what happened next to both of the characters. Usually when playing a game again with a heavy emphasis on its story, I'm able to enjoy the ride despite knowing what happens, but not this time. The shock value is only good for one playthrough. If you're going to play it again, you need the story to be backed up by strong characters, and I think that's the biggest flaw with Last of Us. While the story is able to show the connection between Joel and Ellie, it doesn't allow them to grow as individuals. This is where, for me, the story falters. Sure, it makes me care about them as a pair, but neglects to develop them separately. We don't really get much of a backstory for Joel and Ellie besides little hints scattered throughout. We're told that Joel has done some terrible things from the perspective of his little brother Tommy, but Joel sees it as survival. The problem is, we don't find out what the hell he did that would make Tommy say something like that. I think the beginning of the game was a quick and effective way for most players to feel sympathetic for Joel, but I wanted something more. Give me more insight on Joel and how he got to where he is, since actions speak louder than words. For me, this would have been a more effective way to make Joel as an individual more relatable by seeing the flaws he might have. The same critique can be applied to Ellie as well. That's only one of the reasons that the second playthrough was lackluster. The second is the repetitive gameplay. There's a reason nobody brings it up that much, but it's not because it's terrible, it's just kind of bland, even though you have quite a number of options at your disposal. To survive, you need to gather supplies such as ammo and random objects to craft with. You can craft Molotov cocktails, spike bombs, smoke bombs, modifications to melee weapons, and shivs. The amount of weapons the player is given is completely varied, ranging from shotguns, handguns, and a bow and arrow. Even with all of these tools at your disposal, the most optimal way to handle 90% of enemy encounters is just ignoring them or striking them down with a sneak attack. Keep in mind that I did play on normal, but I also did the same my first playthrough and didn't have this issue. It also doesn't help that the maps are extremely linear. There are moments the paths branch off from one another, but it hardly matters when I explore them and then find nothing. Even when areas are opened up, it feels like a waste of time searching around for items because there's nothing there except for gravel, dirt, or plants. Everything just feels empty. At least this remains consistent throughout the graphics and the soundtrack of the game. I do think it amplifies the grim atmosphere by having rusted cars, broken windows, dust particles floating through the air, and spores sprouting from corpses. The most terrifying sound comes from the infected, known as the clicker. They make these inhuman-like clicking noises to detect their enemies, and hearing them easily ups the tension. This is best utilized when Joel gets separated from Ellie and he has to find his way back through a flooded area lacking any kind of lighting. It felt like a horror game just for a brief moment, and I kinda wish there were more areas like this. I think my feeling with the gameplay and individual character development with Joel and Ellie show that The Last of Us is a perfect example of a game you play once. It's meant to hit you hard with these oh shit moments that consistently keep you in shock the entire way through. But once you know what's coming, it does lose that magic it once had. That's not to say I regret playing Last of Us. I loved playing the game and seeing everything for the first time. It's just that there's not much more mileage to get out of this game with repeated playthroughs. But what do I know? I'm just some random guy on the internet who wanted to review Last of Us, and if you want to see more reviews, subscribe and hit the notification bell, and I'll see you next time.